Margaret Thompson never imagined she would end up in a nursing home. For most of her life, she pictured her final years the way many people do, surrounded by family, sitting in the same home she'd lived in for decades, with the smell of her garden roses drifting through the windows and a lifetime of memories resting softly around her. But life, she would often say with a gentle sigh, has its own ideas. The day she arrived at Rosewood Haven, she felt more like a visitor than a resident. She held her handbag tightly on her lap, the same way she used to hold it on bus rides into the city when she was young. Only now, her hands were thinner, her knuckles more prominent, and the veins a map of a lifetime lived under someone else's shadow. Inside that handbag were a few things she thought she couldn't leave behind. A photo of her children when they were little, a set of house keys she would never use again, and her wedding ring tucked away in a small velvet pouch, not worn, not displayed, just kept. As she sat in her new room, she looked around at the plain walls, the simple furniture, the stillness. The stillness was what struck her most. For 60 years, her life had been noisy, not the good kind of noise, like laughter or music, but the unsettling kind. The kind that comes from arguments behind closed doors, whispered phone calls, and long silences at dinner that you try to fill with anything except the truth. For a long moment, she just sat on the bed and exhaled, as if letting out decades she had never released. The nurse who welcomed her was named Emily, a cheerful young woman with a ponytail and a voice that sounded like warm sunlight. "You're safe here," Emily said. It was meant to be reassuring, but the words pierced through Margaret in a way she didn't expect. Safe. She hadn't felt truly safe in years. She wasn't even sure she remembered what that felt like. She thanked Emily, though her voice was only a whisper. When the nurse left the room, closing the door gently behind her, Margaret stayed frozen in place. And then, slowly, almost cautiously, she leaned back on the bed and let her eyes close. For the first time in a long time, she let herself remember. She remembered meeting George, her husband, tall, confident, charming to the point of arrogance. When she was young, that arrogance had felt like charisma, like something to admire. It made her feel chosen, special. She didn't see the warning signs at first, or maybe she did, but she didn't want to. People used to tell her, "You two look perfect together," and she clung to those words harder than she clung to any truth. Back then, appearances mattered. What people thought mattered. And she, like so many women of her generation, was taught to hold a family together no matter what it cost her. But as Margaret lay in her nursing home bed with the quiet humming of the hallway outside, she felt no anger, not anymore. Just a soft kind of sadness, the kind that settles inside you quietly, like dust on an old shelf. After a few days at Rosewood Haven, she began to notice things, little things. The way the morning sun came in through her window, the way the nurses greeted each resident by name, the sound of laughter drifting from the community room, and the way the residents weren't simply passing time, they were still living in their own way. She also noticed a woman sitting alone at the dining hall each morning. Her name was Helen, and she carried herself like a queen. Lipstick perfectly applied, hair curled, a spark in her eye that suggested she knew things, important things, interesting things, possibly dangerous things. One morning, Helen invited herself to sit next to Margaret. "You look like someone with a story," she said without introduction. Margaret nearly choked on her tea at the boldness of it. But Helen had that kind of presence, the kind you couldn't brush off. Margaret gave a polite smile, the practiced kind she had used her entire marriage. "Don't we all?" she replied. Helen leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Yes, but yours looks heavy." For a moment, Margaret didn't know what to say. No one had ever looked at her and seen the weight she carried. She'd always been good at hiding it, too good. Something about Helen's eyes, sharp but compassionate, loosened the words inside her, words that had been locked up for decades. She didn't spill everything that day, not yet, but she allowed herself to speak a little, to mention marital difficulties and lonely years and things she couldn't change. Helen just nodded knowingly, sipping her tea. Ah, she said, one of those husbands. One of those husbands. The phrase lodged itself into Margaret's heart like a tiny anchor, because that's exactly what George had been. One of those men who thought their wife's patience was bottomless, their loyalty guaranteed, their silence promised. For the next few weeks, Margaret settled slowly into a routine. Breakfast with Helen, afternoon quiet time by the window, evening television in the lounge where everyone pretended not to fall asleep halfway through the movie. She was still adjusting, still learning the rhythms of her new reality. But she found herself thinking less about the life she left behind and more about the strangely comforting life unfolding around her. Yet every night, when she closed her eyes, memories crept in. She remembered the first time she suspected something, George coming home late, smelling of a perfume she didn't wear. She remembered the evenings he claimed to be working late, though his tie was loosened in a way that didn't match overtime. She remembered finding a note in his jacket pocket with a phone number on it, written in handwriting too neat and too round to belong to a man. She confronted him only once, early in their marriage. He had laughed, not a nervous laugh or a guilty laugh, a dismissive laugh. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "You're imagining things." The thing about being dismissed is that after a while, you start dismissing yourself too. You quiet your instincts. You bury your doubts. You begin to believe that protecting the image of your marriage is more important than protecting yourself. George was never physically cruel, just emotionally absent, defensive, and selfish. In many ways, those wounds lasted longer. They were invisible, but they seeped into everything, into her confidence, her voice, her sense of worth. But she stayed, because that's what she'd been taught, because her children needed stability, because leaving felt impossible, because she hoped foolishly that one day he would realize how much she loved him. As she got older, the affairs slowed, but never truly stopped. He became more discreet, though with age discretion simply meant he became lazy with his lies. She found text messages on his phone one day. She didn't confront him. She sat with the knowledge quietly, like she had done her whole life. Then came the day she couldn't ignore it anymore. She was in her 70s by then. Older, yes, but stronger in a way she wasn't when she was 20. She found a receipt for a hotel room booked on their anniversary. That was how she found herself standing in their living room, holding the receipt in her shaking hands, asking George, calmly, almost too calmly, how many more times? He stared at her with irritation, not guilt. "At our age," he said, "does it really matter?" That sentence echoed in her for months, maybe years. It was the final betrayal, not the act, but the indifference. Margaret didn't scream, she didn't cry. She simply packed a small suitcase and walked out the door. The remarkable part wasn't that she left. It was that she finally believed she deserved peace. But leaving meant facing a new reality. Her health was declining. Her house was too big. Her children had their own busy lives. And so, after long discussions and many tears, she made the decision to move into Rosewood Haven. At first, she felt like she'd been abandoned, like life had tossed her into a place where old memories came to rest. But slowly, she discovered something unexpected. The nursing home was not an ending. It was in many ways a beginning, because for the first time, she had space to think, to breathe, to feel. She didn't have to tiptoe around anyone. She didn't have to pretend. She didn't have to shrink herself. She began opening up to Helen more and more, telling her stories she had never voiced aloud, stories of their early marriage when she thought love was supposed to hurt a little, stories of missed anniversaries and secret phone calls, stories of gut feelings she ignored, stories of her own loneliness, a loneliness so deep that sometimes even the walls of their home felt cold. Helen listened without judgment. "Men like that," she said one afternoon, "they take and take and take until there's nothing left of you. But you, my dear, are still here, and that means you're stronger than you think. Margaret smiled softly, because hearing someone recognize her strength felt foreign, almost like receiving a compliment meant for someone else. In time, she started participating in the daily activities, at first cautiously, then eagerly. She joined art class, even though she'd never painted before. She discovered she loved making landscapes, soft greens, gentle blues, places she wished she had visited when she was younger. In exercise class, she moved slowly, but with determination. She began looking forward to meals, to conversations, to the simple joy of someone asking her how her day was going. One afternoon, months after she'd arrived, the receptionist called up to her room. "You've received a letter," the receptionist said. "A letter. Rare these days." When Margaret opened it, her breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. Familiar loops, familiar strokes. "George," the letter was short, plain, almost careless. "I'm sorry, I'm lonely. Please come home." No apology for the years, no acknowledgement of the pain. Just a request. One last attempt to pull her back into the world she had worked so hard to escape. She sat quietly for a long time, the letter resting in her lap. Her heart didn't race. Her eyes didn't tear. She simply felt tired. Tired in the way a person feels after closing a door that should have been closed decades ago. She folded the letter neatly and set it aside. Later, when Emily came in, she handed it to her and said in a calm, steady voice, "Throw that away, dear. Some things don't deserve to be held onto." After that day, something changed inside Margaret. She no longer felt like a woman running from her past. She felt like a woman walking toward her future, even if her future was quieter, simpler, slower than the one she once imagined. The other residents began noticing the change too. She smiled more. She joined conversations. She even joked occasionally, usually with Helen, who would clap dramatically and say, "Ah, a sense of humor emerges." Margaret didn't think she was funny, but she enjoyed the attention. She started helping welcome new residents, offering them the same reassurance she once needed. She sat beside the lonely ones during meals. She asked them their stories, just as Helen once asked hers. She became part of a community, something she hadn't truly felt in years. Sometimes, late at night, when the halls were quiet and her window showed only the dim glow of the garden lights, she would sit at the edge of her bed and reflect. She thought about all the years she gave to a man who never appreciated her. She thought about the version of herself that silenced her own needs. She thought about the young woman she once was, innocent, hopeful, eager to be loved. She wanted to reach back through time and hold that young woman's hands and tell her, "You will survive this. You will grow. You will find strength you never knew you had." But she also knew she wouldn't change the past. As painful as it had been, it shaped her. It gave her resilience, compassion, the ability to understand others deeply. She didn't hate George. That surprised her. She didn't love him anymore, but she didn't hate him. She simply felt free of him. One evening, as she and Helen sat by the window drinking tea, their unofficial nightly ritual, Margaret found herself speaking without thinking. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think my life was over when I left. That coming here meant I'd failed." Helen took a slow sip, then tapped Margaret's hand affectionately. "Oh, darling," she said, "this place didn't take your life away. It gave it back to you." Margaret looked out at the garden, the soft lights glowing against the night. For the first time, she believed those words. She had spent decades caring for others, worrying about keeping her marriage together, carrying burdens alone. And now, in her 80s, she had finally become her own priority. She began to cherish the small things, the gentle clatter of dishes at breakfast, the warm greetings from the staff, the colorful paintings she created in art class, the afternoon breeze that drifted through the courtyard. She even started wearing her jewelry again, not because someone approved or disapproved, but simply because she liked how it made her feel. She no longer wore her wedding ring. Instead, she placed it at the bottom of her handbag in that velvet pouch, where it became nothing more than a symbol of a life she had outgrown. One night, while everyone else slept, she walked quietly to the common room and sat on the sofa, The glow from the television illuminated the room faintly. She stared at her reflection in the dark screen, older, yes, but not broken, not defeated, and she whispered to herself, "I thought I had lost everything, but I found myself." She had never said anything like that before, not even in her youth, not even in her marriage. But the truth of it settled inside her, warm and steady. As the days passed, the seasons changed. Spring brought the scent of jasmine through the courtyard. Summer brought warm evenings filled with laughter from visiting families. Autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and amber, and winter wrapped the home in a quiet that Margaret found comforting rather than lonely. And through all the seasons, Margaret kept growing, not in the way young people grow, fast and wildly, but in the way old souls grow, slowly, gently, with purpose. Her friendship with Helen deepened. They shared secrets, memories, and dreams. Helen confided that she too had lived through a difficult marriage, not with a cheating husband, but with one who had been cold and dismissive. "We all carry something," Helen said one morning, "but we don't have to carry it forever." Margaret found comfort in that. She also became closer to the staff. Emily, the young nurse who had first welcomed her, often stopped by just to chat. Margaret would offer bits of wisdom she had collected over the years, the kind no book could teach. Emily, in return, brought youthful energy into Margaret's room, filling it with stories and laughter. One afternoon, Emily asked gently, "Do you ever miss him?" It took Margaret a long moment to answer. "I miss," she said softly, "the version of him I thought I had, the life I believed we were building. But the real him? No, I don't miss that." Emily nodded, understanding. "You're brave," she said. Margaret smiled at the compliment, not because she believed it then, but because she wanted to. Over time, she began to see her own bravery more clearly. The courage it took to endure what she endured, the strength it took to leave, the resilience it took to rebuild her life at an age where many people feel their story is already written. But Margaret learned that her story wasn't over, not even close. She realized that life doesn't end when circumstances change. It doesn't end when you leave a home or a marriage or a chapter behind. Life continues as long as you're willing to keep turning the pages, and so she kept turning them. She learned new things, how to paint, how to meditate, how to embrace stillness. She discovered new friends, new joys, new hobbies. She laughed more in Rosewood Haven than she had in the last 30 years of her marriage. Sometimes other residents would confide in her about their own troubles, and Margaret would tell them, "You're stronger than you think. If I survived my past, you can survive yours." She didn't say it dramatically. She said it with the quiet certainty of someone who had lived through storms and finally found calm waters. In her 8th month at Rosewood Haven, she participated in the annual talent show. She recited a poem she had written herself, a poem about finding freedom late in life, a poem about reclaiming your voice after years of silence. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Some residents even wiped away tears. Margaret didn't expect praise. She simply felt proud, proud of her words, proud of her journey, proud of herself. That night, she placed the poem in her bedside drawer, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in decades. The nursing home, she realized, wasn't a place she had been forced into. It was a place she had been guided toward, a sanctuary, a refuge, a second chance. In the quiet moments, she thought about George. She wondered if he regretted anything, if he ever looked back on their years together with clarity, if he ever understood what he had lost, not just her presence, but her loyalty, her patience, her love. She would never know, but she also knew that she didn't need to know. His remorse was not hers to carry. One day while walking through the garden with Helen, she paused beside a bench. "Funny," Margaret said, "how life can be so cruel for so long, and then suddenly it offers you peace." Helen looked at her with warm eyes. "Peace comes," she said, "when you finally let go of the things that were never meant for you." Margaret took a deep breath of the garden air. And for the first time, she felt truly free of her past, free of her pain, free of her marriage. And she realized something. She hadn't simply survived. She had finally learned to live, not for her husband, not for her children, not for society, but for herself. She learned to claim joy, not borrow it, to seek companionship, not approval, to build friendships, not facades, to say, "I deserve more," without apology. As the days turned into months, she became a beloved presence in Rosewood Haven. Residents sought her wisdom, staff adored her, visitors felt comfort in her kindness. She wasn't just another resident, she was a quiet anchor in a place that often needed grounding. One evening, long after the halls had settled into their nightly hush, Margaret sat by her window with a cup of tea. The moon cast a soft glow across her room.
She thought about the young woman she once was, the one who believed she needed someone else to define her, and she smiled, because that woman, through all her mistakes and heartbreaks, had led her here, to a place of strength, a place of peace. She whispered into the stillness, "I'm finally home." Not in the house she left behind, not in the marriage she endured, not in the life she once clung to, but in herself. Margaret closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the tea and the quiet of the night wrap around her like a soft blanket. She didn't feel alone. She didn't feel abandoned. She felt whole, and for the first time, in a lifetime full of pretending, she felt truly, deeply, beautifully free.